Heather, you're very welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I think all of the discussion this morning has been really insightful, and I'm going to come at this from a slightly different perspective of talking about community responses to spills and NGO responses to spills. So before I sort of get into that, I thought it was pertinent to talk about the NGO that I work for, FIDRA, based in the Firth of Forth in Scotland, and tell you about how we work as an NGO. Then I'll introduce you to some of the rest of the NGO community that have been nerdling for some time, their responses to spills and some lessons learned. And had we been doing this before lunch, I was going to leave you with a discussion that we could keep going, but we'll have to just save it up, and I'll try and leave a bit of time for questions. But yeah, I really want us to be thinking about what we would do here today if a spill, if while we were all in here, there was a spill going on outside. So why plastic pellets? As an NGO who works on environmental issues, why have we decided to work on plastic pellets? This is the good news. It's preventable. Of all of the issues that we work on, I would say this is one of the easiest that we can solve. So I work on PFAS pollution, on bisphenols, on all sorts of different things. And this is the one that I think we've got the best opportunity. And Falco gave us some examples of some of the policy things happening. But really, a lot of this is very simple. It's using different equipment. It's training your staff. It's putting things in better packaging. It's not rocket science. Also, why do we work on plastic pellets? It's got a very clear source. We know who's responsible, the plastic industry, the plastic supply chain. That is where the responsibility lies. So they are the ones that are in the position to fix it. It's also a bit of a hidden problem that we wanted to draw attention to, and it's a way we can hold the petrochemical industry to account for this pollution. And it's also a way to shine a light on microplastic pollution. Microplastic can be a little bit hard to spot, a little bit hard to see, but when you see scenes like this, it's hard to unsee it. It's also a growing issue, as we've seen with those curves and previous presentations. We're seeing more and more pellets being produced, and even if just a small percentage is lost, that's going to be more and more pellets in the environment. But the main reason why we work on pellets is because of scenes like this. So this is a beach, just the other side from where I live in North Berwick, so this is the other side of the Firth of Forth. And as you can see, it's not really a beach anymore. It's just nurdles. It's like that right up until the shoreline, and this is a triple SI. So it's not unusual to see scenes like this in the Firth of Forth. So what's FIDRA's approach? Well, we're a small NGO based in North Berwick in Scotland. There's about 10 of us. We're there's a lot of scientists that work there, and we tend to take quite a behind the scenes approach. We're not a campaigning organisation. When people hear of NGOs, they often think of, protests or maybe Extinction Rebellion, but we're often working behind the scenes on policy to engage industry, to engage investors, and building up evidence. But what we're all aiming for this project is for zero pellet loss, but we have other projects on PFAS and on various different other aspects as well. But they take a similar approach of trying to engage, get the evidence, and bring about long-term lasting change. So over the last 10 years, the type of things we've been doing is trying to get voluntary action from industry. Initially, we tried to get people signed up to Operation Clean Sweep, and it hasn't worked. That voluntary action has not stopped pellet loss at the scale that we need. We've been involved in a Scottish government working group, and along with Fauna and Flora, and we also helped with the formation of the British Standards Institute's PAS, publicly available specification, PAS 510, that Mark mentioned before. And this really lays out what you need to do if you're involved in the supply chain to prevent pellet loss. We've been supporting colleagues in governments to work for those OSPAR agreements. We've also been supporting things at the EU. So last year we had an event on pellets in Brussels, in the European Parliament. We've been trying to feed little bits of information into IMO. Falco's been leading on that, so we've just been trying to give him the evidence that he needs, and some of the key bits from the Nurdle hunt, for example. And we've also been involved in the plastic treaty negotiations and had a side event there last year. So in all of these things, really what we're trying to do, again, it's not in the picture, we're trying to give a voice for pellets in these policy discussions to make people aware of what they are. And I can tell you, it's still shocking, the number of people that I make that work on plastic pollution, that work in policy, that don't know what a plastic pellet is, and don't know why it would be such a problem. And as we've seen from the presentations on the toxicology of these things, on the toxicity of these things, we know that that's one aspect of it, but just the sheer volume of plastic being lost in this pellet form, we're just digging up oil and gas, turning it into pellets and chucking it straight into the sea. It's a phenomenal loss of resource. So no matter if you're an oil producing nation, even just keeping the pellets that are being produced inside the supply chain shouldn't be a difficult ask in policy. So these are some of the kind of policy interventions that we've been talking about and NGOs around the world are working on. So it could be limits on production, it could be legislation to try and contain pellets on sites and in transport. So we've heard classifying them as hazardous at sea, having these supply chain standards. So we have that BSI PAS 510, but we haven't got a certification scheme that uses that yet. That's something we would really like to see. There's moves to reduce demand on plastic and also increase recycling and pellet control measures. But often when I talk about pellets, I'm not just talking about pellets, I'm talking about flakes and powders as well that are the result of recycling. Everything I'm saying would really apply to those flakes and powders. So when I say plastic pellets, think, oh, she also means flakes and powders. That could be recycled, that could be virgin material, it could be a mix of bioplastic or of fossil fuel derived plastic. So what does engagement look like? Well, at FIDRA, but also for many other NGOs, it's been local to global. As I said, we started in the Firth of Forth, but we quickly realised that this wasn't just us experiencing high levels of pollution, it was across the UK, Europe, globally. So we've worked with industry to see if they would implement some prevention loss measures, and some would. Some were very hard to get to, but it hasn't really changed the plastic pollution picture. We've done a lot of work with public, either directly through doing things like nurdle hunts or with the media. We've worked with investors, so the UN principles for responsible investment, and asked them if they would like to sign up and put pressure on companies that way. And also working with policymakers as well, so talking to MPs, talking to civil servants too. So that's a big part of what an NGO like us, like we do. It's also, how do we take all this information? How do we take all the slides that you've seen today in something that gets the message across really quickly? So we spend a lot of time coming up with infographics like this one to try and get across all the different species. And each one of those species in that picture is not to scale. Lobsters aren't really that big compared to the size of, the fulmar next to it. But there's scientific studies on each of these. So the online version of this, you can hover over it and you can see all the studies. So it's having that ability to kind of communicate very quickly what the problem is. And how do we know about this problem? Well, some of it has been through scientific studies, but we've also commissioned a number of different reports. So we've heard a lot from about the Mapping the Global Plastic Supply Chain report that Oracle did for us. And we also commissioned some of the reports that we've referred to as already about options for reducing plastic pellet loss and also on quantifying plastic pellet loss. And this is how we know that 95% of plastic pellet loss can be prevented. And this is how we came up with figures around how much is being lost in the UK. That was then worked out to how much is being lost in Europe. And then it was the work that we were doing with Oracle that meant we could work out, okay, well, if that much is being lost in Europe and this much is being transported around the world, we can extrapolate that. But these are all estimates, but they are based on as much evidence as we have. We've also used our nurdle hunt, where we ask people to go out, look for pellets on a beach and record what they find, to show that there is pollution that is right across the world. And that has given us a sort of way in to lots of different environments, lots of different communities. And they've shared with us their case studies and their stories of how pellet pollution affects them. So we've talked already a lot about, you know, the growth of the industry. We've also seen a growth in the number of spills, and this seems to be consistent, as Oracle found for us, that with the growth of shipping container traffic, but it is underreported. But so far we know of over 40 acute spills, and most of these acute spills are actually on land. That's partly because of the reporting and the reporting requirements in France, for example. So you have these road spills, you have these train spills, but I think this is something that from current discussions could easily get overlooked, that actually a lot of these acute spills are happening on land, but you then get these high volumes that are lost at sea. So, you know, several containers of pellets compared to one truck, I guess. Having said that, we have seen train derailments in the US, I would say, are happening on probably a monthly basis. There are a huge volume of train derailments going on, and we get reports of nurdles in some of those train derailments. So that's been another overlooked area in terms of spills and how we manage spills. So you've seen these kind of things already, but this is the type of example where we take a lot of data and we try and make it into something that very quickly shows that you have all these trade routes, and then these countries in red are ones, or an entire continent at the bottom, that we couldn't find any data about whether they were importing or exporting the plastics, producing the plastic, sorry, but they were still at risk of huge pellet pollution incidences, and some of them have already gone on to experience pellet pollution. So there's nowhere that's safe, and obviously within those we've got all the inland routes as well. So we've been trying to kind of raise awareness of this issue, pointing out that there's these major shipping routes, and that we have this combination of inland and at-sea spills. But most pellet pollution is coming from that chronic loss day in and day out. Yeah, but the scale of some of these sites, as we can see, this is one of these intermodal hubs, and it's entire cities, and the pellets that could be being lost quite far away from where we can see. And then we've got evidence like this that we've seen already today, but the communities that have been involved in these have all been involved in different ways. So the 2023 spill in Dubai, you can imagine that is a very different scenario, very different government, very different political situation to what happened in Sri Lanka. And how you clean it up isn't just impacted by the coastline and the various different habitats and what kind of spill it is, but it's also dependent on the political environment that you're operating in and the amount of attention that you can get for it. And the same, when we were publishing the report, when we had the spill come in about Mumbai, that got very little attention compared to other spills that we've seen. And if you contrast that again to what happened in Hong Kong in 2012, again, very different response, very different ways that the civil society operates in those countries and what they're able to do with the governments that they have. And things like campaigning might be possible in Spain, but might not be possible in Hong Kong. So it's important to be mindful of the different spills, just as different for the communities that experience them as well. So we've mapped through the Great Nurdle Hunt, over 7,000 nurdle hunts have taken place. We've had over 20,000 volunteers from 400 organisations. And as I was saying, each of those 400 organisations can be very, very different. So some are multinational NGOs, some are one-person outfits who do beach cleans every Friday afternoon. But they're all finding nurdles, they all care about nurdle pollution, they've all given up their time to do this. And here's just a selection of some of the different nurdle hunts that have been going on. And as you can see, from Antarctica to Sri Lanka, we have a huge variety of different places where nurdle hunts have taken place. So what have these communities been doing when it comes to spills? Well, I'm going to just take three spills as an example, but I would say the first one I've chosen to talk about is plastic-free seas in Hong Kong and how they've used it for education. In Sri Lanka, I'll talk a little bit about innovation, and for Spain, for the spill that Spain experienced, I'll talk a little bit about advocacy. But they all probably do a little bit of all of these. But it's also important to realise, as I said, like the things like the Dubai spill, the Mumbai spill, the spills in France, they also have very different NGO landscape, very different responses, depending on, like in France, the authorities can sort of often sweep in and do some cleanup. In Dubai, the authorities responded very, very quickly, but the NGOs were very wary about getting too involved. And in Mumbai, again, the civil society situation there is quite different to what we might be used to here in the UK, and they have huge issues with other kinds of plastic, and this was just another form of pollution. So the Hong Kong instance, it was caused by a typhoon. These containers were lost overboard, and we had bags of pellets, but also the pellets themselves washing up. And the local community have talked about the impacts on fishing and fisheries closing, the economy, concerns about health, and advice went out not to eat certain foods. It impacted protected areas, species, and legacy pollution is still being identified today. But plastic-free seas had just set up, and they wanted to do education work. And they managed to mobilise over 1,000 volunteers who, along with the government, managed to collect 105 tonnes of this stuff. And they've been doing education programmes and plastic awareness ever since. And that works for them in what they can do. As we know from the news, something like a protest in Hong Kong wouldn't be appropriate. It would be a huge risk to you. So what they can do is slightly different to what other people can do, but it's still of huge, huge value. And the fact that they were able to mobilise so many people so quickly is really testament to this person in the middle, Dana. Whereas in Sri Lanka, it was a very different scenario, billions of pellets. We saw wildlife, livelihoods, access. I think this is something that's been overlooked quite a lot, is that community was saying, well, this is our beach, this is where we go to dry our fish. And we can't go there to dry our fish anymore. So it's a site. And I sometimes think about this with that first picture I showed of the beach that's near me. When I go to the community there, and there'll be people walking around and they avoid the beach. They don't go to the beach, so they don't walk their dogs there. And you're like, okay, well, they don't walk their dogs there. But what businesses aren't being set up? That could be a tourist attraction. It's right near the iconic red Fourth Bridge. The beach down the road has got a cafe, a shop, an ice cream van. So what aren't we seeing because the pellets are there? So access and livelihoods are intertwined. And again, the legacy pollution and the collected pellets are still an issue in Sri Lanka. And Muditha from Pearl Protectors has been a fantastic advocate on this issue. And I wanted to try and use his words as much as possible, but he was saying that the beach, 100 kilometre stretch of beach, was completely covered in nurdles. And then this spread out very quickly, as we've heard, to cover over 700 kilometres across the islands. And he says that lagoons, mangroves, coastal ecosystems have been engulfed. And removing nurdles has been near impossible due to their size and colour change. And with time, the nurdles have moved under the sand, making them even more difficult to collect. So again, he was trying to get people out to the beach, and they've very quickly managed to get people out. He talks about in COVID how willing people were to come out, even though this happened at a time when people were being told to stay inside. And they mobilised huge numbers of people, but also, as you can see, there's various bits of equipment that they put together. And I think this is really highlights the kind of innovation that was going on, of what they managed to pull together very, very quickly in the face of this huge, huge environmental disaster. So this is all off their own back of them trying to find ways that would work for them locally with the very fine sand that they had there. And having these nurdle portals that they call them, so trummels, collection stations that are still around the island today. And again, this is just a small NGO that set up a campaign, the Nurdle Free Lanka. So it's turned into one of the biggest volunteer initiatives that Sri Lanka has ever had, with thousands of volunteers and cleanups happening. And this is already out of date. There's more cleanups and more volunteers and more volunteer hours being spent. But some of the challenges that they've said was that, you know, these incidents don't happen in isolation. There was restrictions because of COVID, there was an economic crisis, there's various political tensions, which make it very difficult. And then they also have difficulty of the environment, of where you can actually find the nurdles, especially when they get into mangroves, the weather patterns, the fact that they get embedded in the sand, the fact that they have turned, because of the fire that went along with this, they turned the same colour as the sand, and how to use this equipment, how to keep it going, has been really, really tricky. And we see that time and again of people want to help initially, but knowing what equipment to use and sort of doing the trial and error to use something has been a problem. So sort of bringing us up to date, I wanted to introduce you to Noyalimpa, and they faced this loss of containers off the Portuguese coast, and again they had bags, but also split bags of nurdles washing up. Noyalimpa were a beach cleaning charity, and they were suddenly faced with this problem, and they started mapping it. They started mapping where these nurdles had been found. So they started organising cleanups, but what they saw was a lot of responsibility wriggling between the local administrations, the national governments, the regional governments, and there was a lot of confusion around what cleanups do, but who should be responsible. And they really had to go and get some press coverage before anything happened. They also organised a petition, and working with other NGOs who were already working on policy issues like Surfrider, they also managed to organise an open letter to MEPs, and this resulted in an emergency EU debate, which in policy fields, that's about the best thing you can get for your issue, is if you can get an emergency EU debate on it, right at the time when the regulation that Falco was talking about to do with nurdles and preventing their loss was also being debated. And MEPs voted overwhelmingly in favour of regulation, including on marine spills. Whether that's what will actually come through after the council have got their hands on it, we don't know yet. But this really shows how an NGO, or in this case, a few NGOs, can work together and have used spills as an advocacy opportunity, as well as doing the cleanup. But they're really frustrated because this is the scene that they're now left with, is these nurdles have got into the various bits of marine debris and biological materials, and there's still loads there, but it's very difficult for them to separate it out. And again, Dana has been telling us of how this all came about and how they came to be aware of it, that local surfers sent in photos to Instagram. That's how they first found out about this. And it was confusing for them. They didn't really know what they were, but they soon realised that it was the magnitude of the problem and were looking for support to remove these pellets from the beach. People from all over Galicia and Spain came out to help, and whether it's sending updates about the beaches or tracking the amount of pellets or organising cleanups. But they wish that there'd been better organisation to clean up the spill in the beginning of December. So they didn't get these reports until about the 25th. So what a way to spend Christmas, is hearing about pellets washing up on your beach. So what are the common themes from these kind of community responses to spills? Well, I think the local context and politics is really important and shouldn't be overlooked. And that the communities are often the first on the scene. and they can sometimes quickly mobilise others, but I don't want people to think that this is always the case in all places. It's just not possible in some locations, but also depends what the civil society is like, and what other issues the local population is facing. They very often want practical help and equipment. They want to be able to do something then and there, and they want advice on what to do. But they're also there providing a vital service in terms of scrutiny. They're looking at the cleanup, they're looking at what's going on, they're asking tricky questions, and they deserve answers. And we often, I've heard, Diana and others saying, why is the cleanup looking different on this beach compared to this beach? And some of it's just how it's been commissioned and who's been commissioned to do it. Is it to do with the local landscape? Is it to do with one happened one week and one happened the next week? The other thing is the long-term impacts, as we've been hearing from Marta as well, like these nurdles can come in on different amounts on different tides. And this isn't like an oil spill. These nurdles are going to be washing up for months, years afterwards. And it's not up to the community to continually be dealing with it. But it can also lead to ongoing advocacy, engagement, education programs. Because once you've been nurdle hunting, you'll not stop. So what are NGOs telling us say is needed? Well, they're feeling like they're drowning in nurdles, and they need some more help. They want preparedness and an initial response from authorities, but I think as well from everyone involved, they want some communication and clarity. So, you know, someone else knows that that tanker has lost those containers. Someone else has already mapped where those containers could be washing up. But did they tell Noilumpa? Did they tell the community of what might be coming on their beaches? And is there ways that we can facilitate that? There also needs to be compensation. And it's not just for the immediate, it's for the long term. And as I said, and how do you kind of quantify what you're not seeing and what's not happening because of nurdle pollution? So they want that support with short and long-term pollution. But also we're hearing more and more about chronic pollution and how we shouldn't be overlooking that. So, you know, the pollution that we've been hearing about along the Itchen, that is chronic pollution that is there all the time. And that also needs addressed, and also is featuring in the treaty as well, where we're looking at what are these accumulation zones, how can some of them be assessed, and where would it be safe to remove some of that plastic without damaging the environment. The other thing is prevention is key. I think this is what we hear time and again from NGOs and communities saying, is that they don't want to see what happened to them happen to anyone else. And a lot of them have become really strong advocates for this and for that prevention message. So it really sparks a fire. But the thing I really wanted to get you all thinking about is what would happen now? What would happen here today if, while all of the UK spill response people were in this room and there was a nurdle spill going on outside in the harbour? I'm not aware of the UK's preparedness plan, and I haven't seen SEPA, the Environment Agency, get together on this, or the Coast Guard. And my fear is that I would get a phone call, and then I would probably be phoning all of you and asking for your help of what we should do and what we could do. So I'm hoping that you don't have any questions for me and I can ask you all this. So what would you do?
Who's phone you?
Thanks.
And in theory, there is a plan. And the plan is, and the reason the group was formed initially was because the UK Environment Agency were getting calls from local councils to say these nurdles have arrived, we don't know where they come from.
Yep.
What do we do? And there was a series in 2021 when they were getting quite a lot of calls. And this, in a sense, coincided with COVID, when actually people were using the beach considerably as an amusement, because they were allowed to go out and walk for half an hour a day. So people were paying attention to what was happening on their beaches in a way that they perhaps wouldn't have been. So they were getting lots of reports. And there was one in particular up on the northwest coast at Wire, at Fleetwood, which is up in the west, where there was quite a reasonably big spill, not massive spill, a spill significant to the local people. It was probably 400 kilos, something like that, wasn't it? They told us roughly, if we estimated it, about 400 kilos. So it was not sufficient to trigger the national contingency plan. Where, if I'm right, Neil, it has to be over 1 ton of those spills.
There isn't, so if there isn't any incident or any form or a gas. So
Basically, so the council's view was, actually, we don't actually have the staff, we don't have the equipment,
That's
we
right.
don't have contractors to clean this up. So in a sense, what they had ended up with it, because the beach in the spill had occurred closer to the Mersey estuary, and it gently migrated north to their beach. And because they had coastal wardens, things like that, they were very concerned about it. And they did what they could to clear it up.
Mm.
The EA had no answer to this.
Exactly.
So they came to us and said, we need a plan, we've got to have a plan. So that was how the groups formed, we discussed, we basically gave them a plan. But that's as far as it got. Have we had any call outs as a result of all that work and all that campaigning? The answer is no.
And that
What there
doesn't cover.
there is awareness now within the different parts of the area that they can call us if there's a need, but also they can go onto the ISAS accreditation site and they can find a responder. So, but to be honest, I think, and I'm being completely honest, we are actually frustrated that in all the work that we've done, at no cost to the Environment Agency, including creating a plan that actually it matters nothing to them.
Yeah, I think that.
And I mean, I say those words carefully, and I say that with great regret, because it just doesn't feature as an issue. They have cut their plastics team from. They had a plastics team before. I think there's one woman who has a third of her job is marine litter and plastic pollution. And I find that absolutely gobsmacked. But there's many things I find about the Environment Agency, which I find is equally frustrating. And I hate to say that and no before, and I could back it up with massive evidence.
Yeah.
So I think we would end up getting a call, but you would get a call too. And actually, if we got a call, we would be able to mobilise the responders. But then the next question would be the responder. So if I said to Oracle, I said, well, you've got a plastic spill, it's on somewhere, can you deploy it? Yeah, we can deploy it. But the next question I'll be asked, who's going to pay?
Exactly.
And the question is the council going to pay?
Yeah.
We haven't got any money, for that. And then the question is, are they going to go to their local resilience forum? They're going to say, oh, we haven't really got any money, but we're likely to do something, but don't make it too much money. And and which is why many councils' view is, we haven't got any money, let it flow to someone else's beach. And that's the worst possible attitude you could have. But that would be the attitude of most councils.
Mark, I think just to interject that slightly, in terms of a scenario.
Yeah.
If you're talking about an emergency response where it's lost from a shipping container type incident.
We often don't know the source, that's the issue.
That's what I'm saying, it depends on the scenario, what we're talking about is chronic as opposed to acute. So, stuff that's historically there, yes. But if there's an emergency, which is what the question was, there would be a response that would be put in place. Because I think the polluter, that's comments as now. And so
if the polluter is known, then
absolutely,
But in this case, in the case that most of the cases that we had in 2021 and 2022, nobody knows where it's come from. But there isn't a fund. But what we've been lobbying for with the EA is to create a fund whereby you can dip into it to actually enable that response to be immediate, which is what it needs to be, to clear the nerve of the beach before they come in somewhere and cause further harm. But that, I mean, and unfortunately, we got quite a long way down the track with the EA on that. And then I think buffers, funding buffers. Yeah.
And I think as well, we've had a lot of attention on marine spills, but I don't know what would happen. You know, we've got a little kind of case study in the Firth of Forth where we've got plastic producers, plastic converters, train lines, the A1, a port. If there was, it's a big farming area, so potatoes fall over off trucks all the time. If that was Nurdles, I don't know what would happen. I don't know who's spoken to the Highways Agency about this. I don't know whether they've got a plan in place and whether they know who to call. They know what to do if it's potato, but they don't know what to do if it's Nurdle. And I think these are some of the considerations that we haven't thought through, and could we act quickly enough? Because I think communities will fill that gap. They'll come out and they'll start picking it up, and as we've been seeing, that's not always what we want to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the point position we would say is that the responders would respond, but actually it's a question of
Who foots the bill?
And actually, I think the responder, we work quite hard on the accreditation module so
Yeah.
that we can have trained responders who reach where we have enough responders to do it. We have enough equipment to do it, unless it's a major incident, in which case we can dip into the name and stop that. But actually, it's a question of who pays.
Yeah.
Now, some council will pay because they accept that they've got to do that to be responsible to their citizens. If the citizens won't allow them to let it wash away into the neighbouring county. So there is that, and you know, but I do feel that we haven't got a proof of it, despite lots of lobbying from lots of NGOs and ourselves. We haven't really got a proof of it yet.
And there's no statutory obligations that are specific to Nurdles. It's all generic. And a lot of councils will tell you they won't touch it because it's not litter.
Yeah.
And they'll say that's an industrial emission, so that is Environment Agency or SEPA.
To put you under the spotlight a little bit, with that. So let's play that scenario that we know where it's coming from, and so what is that response? What would that look like?
So then if it's within the port, there's the port authority to undertake their responsibility and bring in their responsibility. If it's out with that, then we would be looking to see what is the P&I or the insurers, what they want to respond to conveying amounts. If not, then we would be mobilising on stock us in terms of if it's trying to contain on the surface impossible, what we're talking about from what I understand in terms of behaviour, if they're released, we tend to see then it becomes an even more difficult recovery operation because things like the trawl room, the size of the nets and the survey is not work. So there's going to be recovery of the shoreline.
And that's it. I think this is sort of stuff that we've been doing a lot with, with Planet Aware and trying to get councils involved, because it is exactly that. It goes on the shoreline. It may only be, a 25 per kilo bag that's washed up. If that's split, obviously that's we works out 1.25 million pellets within one of those bags. I mean, that's enough to seem to report that. So it does need. It needs all of these groups to be reporting more. You mentioned before, you've only had one really report that's come to you from Kitteridge a year or two ago. And I sort of again with that pellet example, I called up the EA and said, well, there's all these pellets here and sort of reporting it. And again, they're like, we can do it's not litter, it's not pollution, but keep reporting it to us, because the more and more we have, the more data we have, we can highlight it is an issue, but it isn't being reported from that level as well. So hopefully, it's these groups that are seeing it day to day. It's these guys that are picking up the beaches and posting on social media. So we just need it is that collaboration. It's getting everyone involved, and then the responders can work with these groups and have a concept which is happening track as well. So.
Right, well, we'll keep figuring this out.
So that actually what we will do is we'll raise this issue. We have a thing called the emerging futurist work. The emerging futurist work involves all environmental agencies It involves fire rescue service, probably nothing. But actually what we will do is we'll raise the plastic pollution as one of those emerging risks. I know it's not really an emerging risk.
It emerged in the 1950s.
No one's actually paying any attention, but I will raise it.
Yeah.
Instead of flag up to the environment.
But we often hear council saying, you know, they will do, they will do litter, as in that is your plastic bottles, your disposable barbecues. Something like this is an industrial emission. So it could be coming out of a factory straight into, you know, an estuary, or it could be coming off a truck or whatever. So it's not litter. They have obligations to clean up litter. They don't have obligations around anything to do with industrial emissions. That's the Environment Agency or SEPA, and then that has to be they will only do things that have got statutory limits on them. So
because you don't know the source, you can't win the debate, and that's the problem. I know I scratched my head.
No,
I had a little bit of hair. But my hair was like it was long, it was flourishing. But now I'll be scratching it against a brick wall. It's gone great. It's fallen out.
yeah. But this is exactly why we've always, like Falco explained, this supply chain approach where we say it doesn't matter whose fault it is, because also you get into quite technical discussions about how much comes from this source, how much comes from that source, who needs to do what. If we had a supply chain approach where every single sector involved had to put in prevention measures, we could reduce the loss by 95%. And if they only worked with other companies that also were doing that, so they only supplied them, they only took, you know, pellets from them, and there was a public register alongside it. So if you had those two things together, that would go a long, long way to stopping this issue. And then we could, you know, really get a handle on it. And we had those preparedness plans for the acute spills, both on land and at sea. Then I think we're getting somewhere, but we're not there yet.
But we will keep trying.
Yeah, we will. We're on it.
We're on the case.
Thanks.